Hi, and welcome to week 6. This week, we're focusing on culture and cultural aptitude. And this is really important because as future healthcare providers, you're going to be working with people from all different cultures and different backgrounds. And so there's no way that you can take a class and learn every possible thing about every possible culture. We are such a diverse and multicultural society. And even within every culture, not everyone that is a part of a certain cultural background has the same values, beliefs, and practices. I just think about here. I identify as someone who was born and raised in the United States, specifically in the Midwest. But there's going to be a great there's going to be differences between what my health beliefs are, my values when it comes to healthcare, compared to someone who maybe grew up in the same area with the same background. We may still have different beliefs and practices based on our family, based on our own lived experience. And so it's important that we learn about different cultural practices, but it's even more important that we make sure that we're not stereotyping or making assumptions. So this is really about exposing us to understanding that there are different cultural practices and cultural beliefs, but then making sure that we have the skills to be able to interact and learn from people from different cultural backgrounds and feel comfortable asking questions and learning about them so that then we can cater their healthcare specific to them and not broadly stereotype or say, "Oh, everyone from, a Hispanic background is going to be wanting, to be treated like this in healthcare." That is not helpful and not at all accurate. But it can be helpful to know some of the practices that are common within different cultural traditions. And so we'll do a little bit of that in class, but I want to give just a little bit of an overview of when we talk about culture, what are we talking about? Because often when we hear culture, we think of like a specific ethnicity or a specific race, and culture is of course much broader than that. And so in your readings for this week, you are looking at two different articles or two different sources. One is Speaking of Culture, um, and then the other is What is Cultural Aptitude? There's also a health literacy tool that talks about how to consider culture when working in healthcare. That may be helpful for you to look at too. And our weekly objectives are to be able to explore the role of cultural norms in shaping individual and group behaviors and engage in discussions that challenge assumptions and promote a deeper understanding of diverse perspectives. And so that's what we'll be focusing on this week. In terms of the first article or the first resource that you're reading, What is Culture? The definition that's provided in that text is culture consists of all the things we make and nearly everything that we think and do, to the extent that what we make, think, and do is conditioned by our experience of life in groups. So when you think about that definition, culture is everything. And what makes it distinct, though, is that it, they have to be behaviors and practices that you do in groups. So if there's something that you really enjoy doing, and as part of just it's a hobby of yours, you enjoy doing it, it's something that you do alone, it's not something that was passed down to you from your family or your neighbors or your community, that is not necessarily culture. But everything else that we do that we have learned and associate with in a group, and that could be as small of you have a culture within your family, your nuclear family, the people that you live with. You have a culture within your school. You have a culture within your neighborhood. You have a culture within your city, your state, your country, your continent, etc. But culture is really defined by the things that we do with others. And so, again, this definition is really broad because culture is broad. So, what we eat, how we dress, the kinds of music we listen to, the movies that we watch, the way that we talk, the language that we use, all of that is part of culture. And so, when we're thinking about culture in healthcare, it's important that we ask questions to our patients about what foods do they like to eat? Who are the important people in their life? Are there religious practices that they participate in that they would want incorporated into their care? Asking those questions is going to help you provide more culturally competent care. The what is culture text goes into a lot of detail about the history of the term culture. And we will talk a little bit about that in class, but I want you to go over that yourself to really see how we've evolved in terms of how we think about culture. And then the article also talks about the 7 themes of culture. And I want you to be familiar with those as you go through this week's readings. They also talk about group membership. And this is really important because a lot of times we assume group membership based on how someone looks. So we might see someone and they appear to be Asian, and we may make an assumption that we assume that they are Chinese American. And that could be based on, whatever assumptions you might have about what a Chinese American looks like. That may or may not be their ethnicity, and it may or may not be the identity that they associate with. So, um, it's really important that we ask questions and not make assumptions when it comes to culture and group membership. So, even if someone is part of or their ethnicity, right? For example, I have a good friend who was um, born in Korea, but she was adopted and she has spent her entire life growing up in Nebraska. She doesn't identify with Korean culture because that's not where she was born and raised, and that's not the community that she grew up in. And so our group membership is about who we interact with and what our practices are, less about just what we look like and even where we were born or raised. So the article talks about cultures and subcultures within cultures, ethnicity, racial identity, social class, and nationality. So I want you to take a look at that while you're reading this week. And then the next article is about cultural aptitude. And this is the definition they provide is a tendency, capacity, or predisposition to learn or understand another's culture. And this is what we're looking for in educated citizens. We are not expecting you to know everything about every culture, but we are expecting you to have a capacity and a predisposition to want to learn and understand another's culture. And so that means you have genuine curiosity. You ask questions, you get to know your patients, you find out what their um, interests and needs and wants are so that we can provide that holistic care that serves both their physical, their emotional, their spiritual, psychosocial needs. So it does require um, humility. So the article also talks about cultural humility, which is a practice of self reflection and recognizing that you don't have all the answers and that your way of doing things is not necessarily the best way or only way of doing something. Oftentimes we will judge or look down upon someone else's practice because it's different from ours. But cultural humility and cultural aptitude is really withholding that judgment and that bias and really um, seeking to understand better what other people's cultural practices are. So it does require some self-reflection, just like when what we talked about with implicit bias. It takes some time to really check in and recognize when those judgments or assumptions or biases might be coming up for us. And then I really like this article. It gives you some um, ideas of how you could ask respectful questions to your patients to get to know them better. Because I think sometimes just having that language is really important. Sometimes people are like, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or I'm afraid of how I ask this question, it might come off wrong. So there's some good questions here in the article. Some that I really liked were, tell me about the things that are important to you. It's extremely open ended. It's not making any assumptions, and it comes from a place of curiosity. Um, the other thing that's important here is that um, we sometimes we are not sure how to ask the question, so we don't ask it at all. I would say getting the more practice we have asking these questions, the more comfortable we'll feel, and we'll do some practice of this in class. But starting your statement or starting off your question by saying something like, "This is a part of our standard set of questions," or "This is something I ask all my patients so that I can serve them better," and then go into that question so that the patients don't think that you're targeting them in some way. "Oh, they only asked me this because I, you know, look different or I speak a different language." Just standardizing that and making sure that you ask the same questions to all your patients to get to know them better, and then telling your patients that this is something I ask everyone can help, um, maybe, make both you and the patient more comfortable. So that is an overview of culture and cultural aptitude, and I look forward to talking more about this topic in class.